serious document, and I think that you've got to get good advice. You get good advice right at the start, and you consider in drawing up that agreement just how the company could evolve, either in a very negative sense or a very positive sense. The business canvas model. This is basically what is the business model? How is the company going to make money out of products and services? And I've spoken about that before. You can have also a lean business plan, which looks at a different aspect of the company. You tend to look at things like the competitiveness of the company, the competitiveness of products that the company's putting out or services the company's putting out. It's a variation to me on the business canvas model. Both of these are one pages, and they can actually do, and they do a superb job at this very early stage. They get this idea organized into a business. They allow you to start. They allow you to actually get funding, because once people see this, investors see this, they say, oh, okay, there's some thought going on here. I can see what that thought is. I can agree with that thought, or I can suggest some changes, but they're very, very useful to have. There's company papers here, articles of association. I think they're called in some of the African countries. We call them a constitution. And this basically is a description. It's a legal description of what the company can do and what it can't do. And so embedded in the constitution, you might find that there'll be a description of the purpose of a company, right? So if the purpose of a company is to make bricks, and someone comes along a little bit further down and they want to, say, make something else, or they want to go and be a service company, then they've got to come back and change the constitution of the company, and that can take some effort to actually do that. It can also take some effort to go and change shareholders' agreements. And what you find is that you may well need several modifications as you bring in new investors. So if you bring in a new investor for the startup phase, you bring in another one for the beginning of growth phase, these people may not agree with everything that's in your shareholders' agreement, and want to make modifications. And certainly I've seen that, and I'm dealing with that right now with I think it was about a 45-page shareholder agreement. So it's interesting, very detailed. And so further down the track here, where you're starting to raise quite significant amounts of money, you're starting to see something like a term sheet. So this basically is a legal description of the terms that money is actually lent to the company or invested in the company. So people can invest by buying shares, and they can invest actually by providing loans. And you see these term sheets. You also see things like share subscription agreements and modifications to the shareholders agreement, which I mentioned before. And when you get towards the initial public offering, where you're dealing with very large amounts of money, you start to see prospectuses. These prospectuses are, I think the smallest one I've seen is probably about 20, 30 pages, but now they're typically, you're getting up to 60 to, several hundred pages for a prospectus, depending on how much money you've got to raise. I'll just talk a little bit about the startup phase. Some of it's really, I don't want to spend a lot of time speaking about it really, because you can read this yourself. But one of the most sensitive things that I found at the startup phase is that I'm putting money in myself, and quite often I'm actually taking money from friends and taking money from family. And it may not be a lot of money that you're actually taking, but you are taking money from friends and family. And if you do want to see friendships fall out very rapidly, lose the money for them. It can sour relationships and so forth. So it's, even though you're dealing with not so much amount of money, you are dealing with relationships. and you have to be very, very careful. And certainly the way that I do it, I front run a lot of this myself. I'm actually putting my own money at risk. I'm not asking anyone else for money. I would be asking, like I was showing back here, the co-founders, they've got to put money in because they stand to make quite significant amounts of money. So they've got to put money in, but these guys may well come months later when we've actually sorted out a lot of the risk, identified the risk, worked out how we're going to manage that risk, etc. The growth phase, that's where we're creating cash, and to create cash, you need cash. And like I spoke about before, that you just need more cash, and it really depends on how quickly you want to grow that business, how large you want to grow that business. You're trying in this phase to identify risk and to lower that risk in terms of failure rate, probability of failure rate. It's a very, very critical time, and it's where a lot of things go wrong. You don't create enough cash to pay all the bills, well, you go bankrupt, right? You can create too much cash, believe it or not, and that creates problems because there is a tendency to say, well, gee, we're generating all this money, we're so successful, we'll just expand at a greater rate than what the capacity of the company actually is. So you go into this wasting stage. So it's a growth stage, but there's a lot of waste in the company and a lot of money gets invested in the wrong things, and it can cause a lot of problems later on. So there's this growth phase that we go through. We are creating cash, needing more cash, trying to lower the risk of failure, trying to increase the probability of being able to scale and build a significant business, and that's what the growth phase is. The mature phase is basically where to me, the excitement's really gone. I've gone out of the company by now. The businesses tend to be growing at about 5% annually. You've built up really solid processes, and everybody knows exactly what they're doing and when they're doing it and exactly how to do it and so forth. And to me, the business, the business has got a little bit boring, but other people really like this. It's secure. Banks love it. It's something they invest in. They can loan money, etc. So that's the mature phase, and I'll leave the rest to you to look at. This is actually a very interesting sort of area that some people get involved in because, especially with private companies, that people don't seem to get to a stage where they want to invest more in the money. They just, everything's going all right. Everything's just humming along. They don't need to renew things, but there comes a time when another competitor comes onto the scene and starts to eat away at their business, and the business goes into decline. And if you're not really thinking about it, if you're not watching for it, that decline can be quite rapid, and it can happen without you noticing it that much as to why it's happening. And when you work out why it's happening, you then find that you can't do anything about it. It's far too late, and the business is done, right? So I'll just let you read through that, but that's the essence of what the renewal or the decline phase is all about. And certainly I've seen with some of my friends' companies that are private companies, they've actually gone into a decline phase, and whereas if they would have really looked and ran the business a lot better and tried to continually grow the company, instead of sitting on a company that might only be worth $1 million, they might have had a company that might be worth $10 or $20 million. But they weren't watching, they weren't paying attention. It was something else. There was something else going on, and they lost the plot. So funding your business at the idea stage, this is really very interesting. So you can obviously have money in the bank. and if you do, that's great. But you can actually fund money through credit and loans. This is actually really quite, the credit card is actually one I've seen, and I've had a friend who started a company that's now worth about $10 billion, and he started it off of his credit cards. It was unbelievable performance. I certainly would never have done it. In fact, he had something like 6 credit cards, and he was revolving the credit and the debt from one card to the next card to the next card, and so on. Anyhow, he managed to survive that, and that was the way he actually funded a company that now is worth about $10 billion. Like I say, it wasn't something that I could actually do. I reckon if I tried to do that, I would not be sleeping for about 6 months straight. Didn't seem to affect him. But that's kind of what you've got to consider is like when you're raising money, what is your risk appetite? What's your risk profile? How much risk are you really wanting to take on yourself, right? And a lot of people have trouble with this. And I was definitely in the same situation that when I was wanting to become an entrepreneur, I had 5 children, and I had enormous sorts of debt that was starting to load up. I had bills every month, so I couldn't actually do without a salary, and it really stopped me from becoming an entrepreneur for quite some years, in fact. But that was my risk profile. That was the risk profile of the family, that we didn't want as a family take on a lot of personal debt, and where we could actually have our house repossessed by the banks, etc. So anyhow, it's a thing that you got to work out as an individual and as a family. And I have seen people not work it out as a family, and the wife suddenly works out that the house that she's living in has in fact been mortgaged to the bank to fund the building of a business by her husband, and the business failed, and the bank has repossessed the house, and she actually has to move out with the children because that's the way things work. So you really have to, and of course what happens after that is people get divorced and so forth, families split up and things don't go well. So you really have to look at your own personal situation. What risk do you want to take on? What risk does your wife, or your partner, want to take on? What risk can your family afford to take on? And just be very realistic about it, and very sharing, very transparent about it. So when you actually are starting up the business, you've got to stay very lean, and you've got to stay very flexible. You've got to know what your options are. You've got to keep your costs down as low as possible. And you've got to keep your fixed costs down as low as possible. So not start buying cars and buying offices and stuff like that. That's completely inappropriate when you're starting up a business. And you've really got to go after your customers. You've got to have people in your team that are action-orientated people, like I've spoken about before. So I've talked about the different levels of funding. So seed funding, $10,000 to $200,000. You're valued at zero at the start, and you're talking to friends, you're talking to family, you're finding incubators. If they don't exist, try to engineer them, and that's what I'll be doing next time I come into Africa, is engineering these sorts of groups. There's some interesting pictures. If you've never seen Shark Tank, where people are trying to raise money for seed funding, there's quite a few different YouTubes. You can click and watch those at your own convenience. Crowdfunding is what I'm particularly interested in right now, because I think that it's a way of funding many of the ventures that I'm aware of that nurses and midwives are putting towards me. I can see that crowdfunding is going to be potentially a very, very useful way of funding, no matter what stage you're at. I think you're going to be able to use crowdfunding to do quite a lot. So I'm certainly investigating that, and that's very active right now. It was kind of interesting to me to know that crowdfunding actually started way back in 1885 when they actually had the Statue of Liberty taken to America. Really quite amazing. I didn't know that at all. There's lots of different ways of doing crowdfunding. One is what is called rewards-based crowdfunding. What that means is that people will give you money, but they want some reward. It doesn't have to be cash coming back, but they want some benefit coming back to you or to them, right? It's a great idea for startups who want to test the market. If the idea fails to attract goods, it's a good sign they'll fail to attract customers. It's also a good funding source for businesses with really innovative products or loyal customer bases. It's easy to build on the enthusiasm of customers, investors to get funds they need. And I'd be seriously looking at this and thinking about what reward would I be able to provide to investors who provided crowdfunding. You can see some examples of these sorts of reward-based crowdfunding. Equity crowdfunding is very much the same as what I've been talking about. It's where people give you money, but they want equity, they want shares in your business. And there are some very unscrupulous people around who loan money, and you'll see plenty of these. They're very, very interesting people. They can wear suits and ties, they can speak very well, and they can offer you lots and lots of money, but you want to be very careful in dealing with them because they're actually after your idea, they're after getting control of your company. So you need to be very, very careful with some of the equity-based crowdfunding because you can simply lose control. One of the things that I really don't like, and I was actually rung up about 2 months ago by someone who was wanting to invest in a company, one of our private companies, and he, lovely talk. I'd never met the guy, talked for half an hour about all sorts of things, and then he put this convertible note to me. A convertible note is, if you see that, you've just got to look straight at what the conditions of that convertible note are. And you'll find that if you can't repay, the convertible note is like a loan. Now, if you can't actually repay that loan, then the convertible note basically, or many of them basically allow the person who's provided that convertible note to take control of your company. And when you're doing a startup company, that's not a space you want to be in. Because if you've got the next great idea, you do not want to sell that idea out for virtually nothing. So you've got to be very careful with the equity funding. You've got to know who those investors are, have a real good look. Do not be ashamed. Do not hesitate to ask a range of questions. And I can put a range of questions out there and share them with you that I would ask and do ask of anyone who's offering funding. Okay, so that's the equity funding. There is peer-to-peer lending, and you can read about that. I haven't been involved in that too much myself. How much does the crowdfunding cost? Bottom line is that you're going through a crowdfunding group, which might be through a website. They generally take around about between 5, 8, 9% of the money that you raise. So you go and raise $1 million, they'll take 5 to 9% of that as their fee. Okay, so that's the cost of raising money, and it's the cost for crowdfunding. If you wanted to actually raise money by equity, going through brokers, that's around about what you would pay there as well. So you'd pay 5 to 8% to brokers who would find buyers for your shares that you have that you want to sell. So you'll see this 5 to 8% pop up in equity. You'll see it in crowdfunding, etc. And it's the standard sort of cost, if you like. There's different steps that you've got to do to actually go through a crowdfunding campaign. I've got them fairly well articulated there. They're very obvious. You go to some of these different crowdfunding campaign sites and you can get the steps that are particularly relevant to that site, right? So I'll just leave it with you to actually read this and go to those websites. There's pros and cons for the rewards-based crowdfunding. Pros, cons, you can read through those. Equity-based crowdfunding, pros and cons. And we can talk about that, but I won't do that at this stage. I think I'm running a little bit behind at the moment. In terms of angel investors, there are, like I said, angel investor funds. You can find these in there can be foundations of very high net worth individuals. These angel investors are very interested themselves in entrepreneurship programs, and there's one here, and you can have a look at that site. But this is not the only one. There's several of these. Some of them are a little bit obscure. They take a while to find, but it's well worth putting in some effort to try and find them. So you're looking for angel investors, your angel investor foundations, angel investors within entrepreneurship programs. Again, watch the detail. The devil is in the detail, but some of them are really good and very well structured, very well intended, very ethical funds to get money from. There are lots of other ones, the medical credit funds. You can see here the medical credit fund offers loans varying from $1,000 to $2.5 million. And it's paid out quite a lot of money. They are accessible loans for healthcare, small, medium companies, hospitals, health centres, dispensaries. So people might want to have a look at this, the Medical Credit Fund. That's the link. So go and have a look at that. And I'm certainly willing to help and offer any advice in regard to that. Series A funding, I've talked about that. Series B funding, I've talked about that. Series C funding, which is the next one up, where you're looking at $100 million. That's further down the track for us. I won't go into that right now. So, yeah, there's a lot of different funding around. It can be quite chaotic and confusing. I hope that what I've been presenting to you gives you some idea of what the different options of funding companies are. And quite willing to take any questions on this at all. So feel very free to ask either as part of this program or just to send me an email or just post a question on the chat. There's actually microfinance that's available for people doing certain sort of activities like small-scale farming. And I know there are people who are interested in small-scale farming, which is why I bring this one up. So this is a way of actually getting money to invest in that sort of activity. So there is digital health innovation accelerator programs that are starting up. That's fairly interesting, and VACRA is going to be involved one way or another with that. So it's certainly something we're very, very interested in monitoring. You can have a look. There's their websites there. There's a lot of different investment funds. So I don't think that raising money is a particular problem. I've never ever had that problem. It really is more a case of getting the business model right, getting the company structure right, getting shareholder agreements right, getting compliance and governance right. And once you've got all of those things really honed and well articulated and well documented, you'll find that there is quite a lot of money around. And I'm sure that there's going to be a lot of these different ideas that are floating around as part of this program will be funded through one of these mechanisms or another. Okay, so that's the first sort of cut of being funded. how to access money. Quite happy to take any questions. And so if there are questions, let me know, please. Okay. Rumbidge.
Hello, Peter. Thank you so much for the detailed presentation. My name is Rumbidzai and I am Zimbabwean. My question is more on it's focused on the initial stage. My question is, who determines the share value at the initial stage? Do you have to source auditors, or is it a random figure that you just come up with as the major investors or incubators of the idea? Thank you.
Okay. No, really good question. Look, so the question is who sets the value and who sets the number of shares? Well, basically that's set by the co-founders. So in my case, I would be setting the number of shares and I would be setting that value. But in actually doing that, I have got in the back of my mind that share structure, how that company is going to evolve. So if I'm issuing shares at 1 cent, I've got to be thinking about, okay, that's very good to start with. How much value am I going to be able to drive to before I need to go and get more money, right? So it's a little, I guess, a little bit of a trial and error. But if I try to give an example of it, say that you and I are going to start a company, and to really get it to stage 1, that is that we have a clear product. We have we've done a lot of market research, and we really know we're going into this market segment, and this market segment is such and such a size and worth so many dollars and so forth. So you say we need $25,000 to get to that definition, then the next question comes is, how much money would I need to go to the next stage after that? And if that is $100,000 or it's $200,000, then I've got to be talking about raising, selling shares, and how much would I be selling shares for there? And I would not be selling shares for the same price as what I bought the shares at, right? So if I go back, perhaps I'll just have a look at okay. Yeah, so here we're basically saying that 3 of us needed to raise $70,000, and as a starting proposition, we're going to value the shares at 1 cent. So therefore, that's the number of shares we need to issue, 7 million shares at 1 cent, and we will raise $70,000 in cash, because that's the amount of money that we're going to need to get to this next stage, right? With this startup stage, right? And as I was saying when I was explaining this, we're sort of saying here that this is a great idea. We're really excited. We're going to change the world. We're going to change people's sleeping patterns, etc. So we're wanting to do a pretty good job. We need 70 grand to do that job to really make sure that when we go to the next lot of investors here, these angel investors, we've got everything covered. We know the market we're going to. We know the market segment. We know that the product is actually going to fit in the market, etc. We've got an idea of what the product's going to look like, but we don't have a product. But we've got a very good case to develop that product, right? So then, yeah, when we've done with that money, the question is, we want to, as this stage here, actually develop a product, a minimum viable product, and have at least that first pivot, if not a second pivot, with the market. So we know that the product is going to pass the market sniff test, if you like, and the market may even well start to buy it. And so in the back of our mind, we have a round sort of figure of $225,000. That's what we're going to actually have to raise. And if we're going to raise that sort of money, and we think that we've made this terrific increase in value, then that's the number of shares that we've got to offer. So, so this value here, to be quite honest, I would probably always start with just 1 cent. Occasionally we've started at 0.001 cent, but 1 cent is sort of like a reasonable figure to start with. This is actually much more controversial because people will, especially these people coming in, they'll want to be really, really convinced that that 15 times the original investment of value has been created. So this is really where the controversy starts to build in here, right? It's not so much here. It's when you go from the start to the, from the idea to the startup. That's where it really does get you get a lot of argument, discussion, and also similarly when you go from there to there. This one would be less controversial because you're not increasing that much. They want to understand what value that you are delivering, and they want to have a belief in that value, and the belief in the capacity for you to generate that value. But overall, it's probably not a great ask to do that, as long as you can make a reasonable pitch about doing it. This would be the much more controversial stage. Is that sort of answering your question?
Yes, Peter, well elaborated. Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. Okay. Yangama, are you there?
Yes, Peter.
Are there any questions from yourself?
Not at this stage. I've
Not?
understood. I thought there in the comments section, everyone is commenting that nice presentation. So there's some feedback for you.
Okay, all right. Yep, I can see that now. So okay, that's good. So people can just put the questions out as we're going along, send emails, etc. in, so it's a case of actually trying to read through all this material. I did not go over everything because it just takes too long to do that. So if people, when they come to read through, and I would really, I'd really encourage people to read through. If you've got questions, just post them out by email, and they'll be answered. Okay, so if you want to have a break now.
I have a question.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm Lillian from Malawi.
Yes.
Yes, it's actually two questions. The first is, when you are starting an idea, and when you have shown the stages that the business can grow, sometimes also the ideas may change along the way. how do we deal with that situation? And of course, when you are changing, it could be that maybe other people will come in with the inputs. How do you treat that in terms of shareholding? The second question is, I reflect on the example that you gave, where you are starting up a business and you have used your family property as a collateral. And then if I'm looking at the 3 people starting up together, does it mean that people have to have equal shares, or maybe the actual, conceiver of the whole idea might invest more in other ways? I don't know how that can be treated. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. Okay. Yep. There's 2. That's actually 2 really good questions. So when you start a business and you let's just say for simplicity's sake that you start with idea number 1, but you find out that, let's just say, there's a better idea, right? And
Yes.
the better idea means that you will do something different, but because it's a better idea, it actually earns more money, makes more money for you, and it makes more sense for you to invest your time and your money in that better idea. Well, I just would be changing across to that better idea, right? If the better idea came to you from outside of the company, then you actually have to think about how you deal with that. You can deal with that by, so this is by, so if you got 3 co-founders and you started on idea number 1, but someone else came out and said, oh, there's another idea here, maybe you should have a look at that, then you should think of whether you offer that person to come into the company as a co-founder and have the same sorts of power and, shares and so forth if they put their idea in. That's the kind of thing. How do you reward a new idea that comes external to the company? How do you reward an idea that's actually generated from within the company? Some of these things are actually quite, it's not at all black and white as to how you deal with it. But certainly you've got to deal with it. The only thing in my experience is that you've got to really be very honest and very transparent in your dealings with new ideas. You want new ideas to come out. Say if you've got a company and you've got 5 people in the company. I mean, basically, in my sense, I'm always wanting to improve on the ideas in the company, to improve on my ideas. I don't think that for 1 minute that all the good ideas actually come from me. They're going to come from another person, and they can come from the fact that you've got 5 people and you're all sitting around a table and all contributing to the development of a new idea. So there's a lot of different ways that ideas can come about. But if it's a better idea than the one that you're sitting on, then and you can actually use that idea, then I would go for it. And the only question is, how did that idea, how was it developed? Who is there additional ownership that should be granted, by the company in terms of shares and so forth, that kind of thing. So it's not black and white. The answer is not black and white, but it's something that you really just have to deal with in a very ethical and very transparent way and very open fashion. And it can, there can be a lot of differences of opinion about about what ideas are worth. In fact, that's one of the reasons I became an entrepreneur, because I had problems with the value that people would actually put on my ideas. I always thought that they just there was no foundation for some of those values, and I'd much rather have a marketplace put a value on my ideas than an individual. So anyhow, I hope that's answered that question. The other question you asked about, if you're starting up a company and you've got several people and each of those people get money by mortgaging their property, if that's the right way of looking at it. So they have each of them have a house and they go to the bank and say, well, I want a $5,000 loan because I want to start a company, and the bank would say, right, okay, if you default on that loan, then that loan has as collateral a property or part of a property or a car or whatever. Is that the question you're sort of asking?
Of course, yes, but I was looking at, do we have a cushion for those situations where maybe somebody might need to have more shareholding because of the additional risks that they have taken to contribute in the company?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a thing you've got to agree with. Like your co-founders. So there was an example there where I think it was Jill got 2.5 million shares and the other co-founder got 1 million shares. And the agreement there that is implied by that is that they've sat around a table and said, well, look, Jill, this is really your idea, but it's not 100% your idea, but it's probably 80% your idea. Therefore, you'll get 80% of the shares. It's a conversation like that that's got to go on. The other sort of conversation too that does come up a lot is, some people actually don't have a lot of money, right? So they can't go and put $5,000 into a company and in that way they get whatever it is, 1 million shares, okay? They just don't have that money, but they're willing to put their time and plus or minus their idea into the company. And so you actually just have to have an agreement as to, I'll take out the idea and say, okay, so someone else wants to put $5,000 worth of their time in to getting their 1 million shares. They don't have the money. So you then have to make an agreement as to what is the equation that tells you how much time that person has to put in to be equivalent to $5,000. So you basically do that as, you look at what the earning capacity is of the person. So if the person is actually getting, let's just say $5,000 a month, then for them to get $5,000 worth of shares, they're donating their $5,000 worth of time, which equates to they donate 1 month. They've got to do 1 month without pay for the company, right? Do you follow that?
Yes. So it is like equity shares, is it? You can
that's right.
In equity because they are giving their time. Okay.
Yeah. And people have done that in the companies that I've been with. I sort of have a little bit of a philosophical view about money and time. And if I could try to explain that to you simply, money is just money. And, by and large, you make money and you can lose money and so forth. And that's kind of what I do. But time is actually not money, right? Because if I lose time, I'll actually never get it back. There's no way I can ever go and get time back, whereas I lose money, I can get the money back if I'm smart enough, right? So I actually have much greater value. I put much greater value on time than money, right? If you understand, if someone's going to put time into a company, then that means a lot more than someone just passing by and they say, okay, $5,000, yeah, here it is, where you go, kind of thing. The time is really very, very, it's very precious and very, very valuable. Okay, Gamu?
Hi, Peter. Gamu here from Zim. So you've kind of answered my question, because I was going to bring you back to the issue of shares and ask that, is it possible to issue out the shares according to the time and effort that one of the co-founders is putting? So yeah, I'm answered there.
Yeah. 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 So when you look at that, the Excel spreadsheets, and you see that, a co-founder is actually getting issued shares at 1 cent, right? That one of the reasons that that's okay is because it's known, although it's not always the case, that the co-founder is in fact going to put a significant amount of time and intellectual property into converting those shares, making those shares a lot more valuable, right? And that's built into that 1 cent price. That's why someone else who comes along, like an angel investor, and they've got their $15,000, they cannot get shares at 1 cent because that opportunity's gone. That's gone because the co-founders have put not only their 1 cent in to get a share, but they've put a lot of time and a lot of effort into it. And you can think of that differential between an angel investor buying a share at, say, 10 cents versus a co-founder getting it at 1 cent. So it's a 9 cent differential on the on each share. And you say, well, what's going on there? Well, what's going on there is that the co-founder's time and their intellectual property has actually created that 9 cent of value. And that 9 cent of value gets accredited back to the co-founder, because that's where, that time and that value actually came from, right? You following that, Gamu?
Yes, I'm listening.
Yeah, okay. So the problem does come in when you get, like 3 co-founders and they all say, okay, yeah, we're all co-founders, we're all equal. And we all have 2 million shares at 1 cent, which is one of the examples. The trouble is that if, let's take an extreme case, one of the co-founders actually ends up contributing all the intellectual property and doing all the hard work, and the other 2 decide to go and buy a yacht because their shares are worth a lot more value, and they actually don't do very much at all, then problems really arise. And to be quite honest, quite frank, I'm actually living with one of these situations right now. It happened that 2 co-founders actually went in and did a lot of work that created a lot of value, and the other one sat in the fence and occasionally would turn up and mostly not. Yet that co-founder actually had the same amount of shares as the other 2 co-founders who did all the work. So it's caused a great deal of animosity and bitterness and so forth. So that's, that it really becomes problematic. And that's where it comes down to, things like the shareholder agreement, what's written in there. Like, don't assume that everyone's going to do the same amount of work and contribute the same thing. You've got to have some description of the role, the responsibility, and the amount of work that is expected of the co-founders, in particular the co-founders here, right?
Yes.
It's not a good thing just to assume everyone is going to behave themselves. Quite put it like that. That's why I was saying those shareholder agreements, they really need to, you need to look at those, you need to think about them very clearly. And yeah, I could probably get some some reports and some analysis that, shared with you about shareholder agreements, but they can be a cause of a great deal of animosity and a great deal of, well, it can actually end the company, that the company won't go forward because the co-founders just disagree, and it becomes almost like a violent disagreement such that they don't talk to one another, so they don't cooperate with one another, and things just don't turn out properly, right? So the shareholder agreement is fundamental, and you get a lawyer to look at that. The advantage of getting a lawyer is at least the lawyer is meant to be and should be, you have to check this, that they are completely independent of all the co-founders, right?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that.
Okay, I hope I answered your question.
Yes, you did. You well elaborated. Thanks.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, so
yeah, it doesn't look like.
no, okay, so do we have a 10-minute break? People
Yes,
like a 10-minute break? 5 minutes?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. 10 minutes, so be back in 10-minute time then. Thank you. Okay, we're getting set to go to the next session. This is really about the legal considerations. I've touched on these before, or certain aspects of the legal considerations, and the importance of these is that if you don't actually build on the right legal structure, there's a very high likelihood that you won't raise money. If you do raise money, then it follows that if something goes wrong, then a lot of legal liability can be thrown at you, and you will find that, at least in one of the underlying assumptions in British law is that ignorance is not a defence. So you can't get up if you're challenged in court and say, well, I'm sorry, I didn't know. So that's not a defence. The judge generally gets fairly shirty about that and says, well, that's your responsibility. You should have known that. So it's a very important aspect of actually building a business is to get the foundations of the business set up properly. And properly means that really, in the end of the day, you need to involve a lawyer very early on. You could say, well, no, I will just wait. I'll just get a little bit further down the track. Well, it turns out that getting further down the track actually can make it more complicated and it can actually cause more problems than it solves. So it's strongly my advice, and certainly advice that I've actually lived by. So I'm not just giving out advice, to get a lawyer involved very quickly. Typically, the way I've done this is I've actually, because I know several lawyers, both in Africa and Australia and America, etc., that I've actually got lawyers involved in the business by making them a director and or giving them some small equity in the company. So that's the way that I've tended to work. Yes, I get a lawyer involved very early on, right at the start, in fact. And I'd get them involved by, getting them to put some skin in the game, really. I'd say, well, okay, there's 10% of the company available to you, but you'll actually have to pay for that 10% of the company, just like co-founders are paying, but you pay at that sort of very base level price. And that's can be also captured in terms of the lawyer becoming a director. Now, a lawyer becoming a director actually is not necessarily the best thing to do, especially for the startups, because a lawyer is a person who is trained to not take risks. And what you're doing as a startup is that you are, by definition, taking risks. So it's a very unusual lawyer that is really useful in a startup, in my opinion. Quite unusual. They're quite rare. You do find them, but they're typically, they can be more of a burden than an asset, if you like. Okay, so there's a lot of reasons to do this. Shareholder agreements I've talked about, partnership agreements, similar to shareholder agreements, but they're just to do with a partnership rather than equity. Shareholders agreements are to do with equity. Having some way, whether it's in the shareholder agreement or by a partnership agreement or by both, of there being a very, very clear understanding of what the mutual obligations are of the co-founders, because the co-founders are the ones who they're leveraging their knowledge, their experience, their ideas, and that can be quite large leverage. But if one of the co-founders or two of the co-founders or don't actually follow their their money, their founding ideas, they don't contribute anymore, that can be a real problem. It's a little complicated to understand for me to try to explain in a short period of time exactly how all those problems sort of arise and can play out. But all I should say, the best way to handle it is to handle it up front and to have a very clear written understanding of what the mutual obligations and the responsibilities and the contributions of the co-founders are going to be as the company develops, right? And so you might want to consider, for example, that if one co-founder is actually doing all the work, then there would be some additional shares granted to that co-founder who does all the work, and they're granted under these conditions, and it's this amount of shares, etc. So these kind of things, you might think that that I'm being a little bit pedantic and overly dramatic, but I can tell you that you can find a lot of problems if you don't have these things worked out. Business agreements, you've got to have these sort of business agreements between businesses. So you might have like a partnership agreement with businesses, and certainly we've operated like that, and I might be able to talk a little bit more about that later on. You've got to really look at also the protection of intellectual property, because that is kind of the building, one of the fundamental building blocks of the company. And if you don't have that protected, then very strange things can happen. You may not have, you might find a competitor growing next to you that might be a lot bigger than you, and you having no leg to stand on because you haven't got your intellectual property protected. They've found that out, and they've decided to take advantage of that and come into competition with you and put you out of business. So the intellectual property is extremely important. Understanding of all the state and national relevant laws and their obligations, that's actually quite important. And that's one of the reasons that I've always really tried to get lawyers involved with the company, because there's only so much you can actually do as a person. You can't understand everything. You can't do everything. You've really got to get some expert opinions on tap, and preferably aligned with your business. So that's my kind of view of it all. And so yes, that's what I do. I get a good commercial lawyer on board as soon as possible. But having said that, it's very, very handy to know what the kind of the real crunch points are in law, so that you can ask the right questions of the lawyer. Because if you can't ask the right questions of the lawyer, lawyers can talk for a long time, and it can be very expensive. So you really want to know what do you need a lawyer to look at? What are the key questions and the key variables and the key dimensions of these agreements and so forth? And you need to be asking the lawyer and directing the lawyer as to what the lawyer needs to provide, right? Because you don't want the lawyer to be guiding the company. You've got to guide the lawyer. Okay, so when you're looking at setting up a business, there's a lot of different things to consider. There's the choice of business structures, the documentation of those business structures. There's your employer responsibilities as you employ people. What are those? You tend to get into employer share option schemes and things like that. That's also very, very important, especially in the startup phase, because these sorts of option agreements and option plans, share option plans, really do give proper alignment to key members of that startup team. So it's not just a matter of the co-founders actually getting alignment through their shares that they get granted at the start. It's actually as you get key people coming into the company, they need to actually have shares in a similar manner, but not the same amount of shares, and maybe not even at the same price. Typically, it's not at the same price, but they need to get some kind of incentive beyond just getting paid a salary to contribute and to help in growing the company. Intellectual property, you've got to figure out just what is the intellectual property and how best to protect it. So your job is to actually define what that intellectual property is. You then take that information and ask a lawyer, how would they protect that property? Various ways you can do it. The partnership agreements, they're can be quite complex agreements. They need to be defined by a lawyer. Shareholders agreements are spoken about, etc. When you're looking at that choice of a business structure, the documentation, there's quite a few variables to look at, very important factors. Like how does the business actually, and how do the founders actually maintain control of the business? How do they lose control of the business, or how could they lose control of the business? So this is actually something that's it's a key consideration when you're structuring the business. The cost and complexity of the formation of the business, sometimes, especially if you're going global, it can be extremely costly and complex to actually set businesses up. And I wouldn't want to go into that, but you can end up with businesses domiciled in islands in the Atlantic Ocean for taxation efficiency reasons. You can end up with small companies in each of the different countries. You can end up with holding companies, etc. So there's a never-ending sort of complexity of formation that you can actually set up. But the question really is just how can you make the business as simple as possible and no simpler? That's the kind of question I go after. I know I can build up lots of complexity, but I really want to just make the business as simple as possible to achieve my goals. Okay, so limitation of liability. So you don't want a lot of liability hanging on yourself. You want to try and minimise that liability, and also make sure that you isolate different sorts of liabilities in different countries and different companies. So you have to just look at the legal standing, the legal structure of different companies and get legal advice on that. There's tax implications you actually have to sort out. There's holding taxes and so forth when you're going into international businesses. They can be quite complex, as one could imagine. And continuity of existence, what happens when the business actually is taken over? What happens when the business actually falls over? It doesn't work. How do you wind the business up? How does it complete, etc. So there's sorts of business structure considerations that you should be going through and thinking about it. You can actually do quite a lot of this sort of research yourself, a reasonable amount on the internet. And like I said, you get the key questions, try and tabulate them, formulate them, and get some legal advice from a commercial lawyer. You need to know what your responsibilities are if you're a co-founder of towards employers. In Australia, we've got increasing responsibilities for employers. It's really just about it is in fact a profession in its own right, known as human resources and human resource management. But it's problematical when you're a small company to know just what your responsibilities are and to maintain those responsibilities and those legal entitlements and so forth, and how you deal with safety accidents that do occur. You need to understand just how to deal with those sorts of situations and potential events. Intellectual property is something that I've been dealing with for a long time, mainly because I've created intellectual property and I continue to create intellectual property. It can be very, very confusing and just not clear at all how to handle intellectual property, how to protect it. Because in some senses, and we've actually done this, one of the ways we've protected our intellectual property is actually just we haven't let anyone know what we do. So it's called a trade secret, and we simply don't talk about any of the details. We don't let any of the details out about what we do. No one really will know it. Anyone who works with that company has to sign an agreement that basically says that on them leaving the company that they are to keep all information confidential and to not behave in any way that conflicts with that information and with the knowledge and with the business. And that's the way we've actually operated in some of the companies. Other companies say, well, okay, we should, anything that is really patentable, we should actually take out international patents, and we certainly have done that as well. But the taking out of international patents as being a way of protecting intellectual property means that you actually have, going out into the public domain, you have a very reasonable description of your intellectual property because that's in the patent. And so you do find that that people do read those intellectual patents, property patents, and there are ways around them. And I guess one of the things that you've got to keep in the back of your mind is that those patents are, and no matter whether you've got a lawyer or what to actually draw the patents up, they'll do their best effort, but they will never provide a guarantee. And I'm certainly not aware of them ever providing a guarantee that the patent will be what they call a defendable patent. That is, that you can go to a law court and say, well, I've got this patent and these people over here are encroaching on my patent and I'm going to sue them and I'm going to claim millions of dollars. Well, that may or may not be the case. What actually happens is that the judge makes that decision, and there is no guarantee that the judge will make a decision in your favour that the patent is valid and there has been encroachment of the patent. So yes, you can go to a lot of trouble, you can go to a lot of expense, you got a lot of time and draw up patents, but you may not have the protection that you think you do have, and you will only ever find out when you have to go into a court to challenge the patent. So you can license your intellectual property, you can register any intellectual property, as I've been talking about. There are patents, there are trademarks. Trademarks are actually quite interesting. So if you come up with a logo that's particularly an attractive logo, you register that as a trademark. And so no one else in the world can actually take your logo and use your logo. And same for words. You see the French were protecting the word champagne. So no one else in the world can make champagne because the word champagne is really trademarked to a French company. We've actually had companies that have tried to and have actually successfully challenged us on some of our logos because our logos look too similar to theirs. They have a trademark on their logo first, and we've had to change our logo because for the trademark protection. So there are logos, there are words, there are combinations of words and other sorts of branding paraphernalia that can be protected by trademarks. Copyright protects writing, music, films, computer programs and stuff like that. And there's a procedure there that you have to follow, and that's fairly well documented on the web. There's other trade secrets was the other one I was talking about right down the bottom. And there's certainly someone like myself who likes to keep things rather simple. I don't mind actually keeping things as a trade secret, and because it makes my life a lot simpler. I don't have that added protection, but the protection I get is that no one will actually know what exactly goes on to make a certain product or to deliver a certain service. So the first step in, when you are creating a business, it's worthwhile actually just going through, sitting down very calmly and working out what your actual intellectual property assets are. And it's like having an asset register. Once you actually know what your intellectual property assets are, then the next step is to work out what kind of protection is the best way to protect that asset. And I think that's where you start to, once you have that IP, the IP asset register, and you have that reasonably well defined, that's the time you go to an intellectual property lawyer and get their advice. Partnership agreements are really very, very interesting. And when you think about it, it is actually quite fundamental. You've just got to define exactly what each partner does, what their role is, what they're accountable for, and what they might get paid, and how they might get paid, and when they might get paid. So this is really, it's very simple stuff, but for some reason, people quite often don't put enough effort into actually defining these agreements, and these agreements are can be very grey. They can be very contentious, and so later on down the track, when the company turns out to be a very, very valuable company, there can be a lot of legal action that relies on reliance of and documentation that's in these partnership agreements. If you don't have that documentation, it comes down to he said and she said, and then they said, etc., and that gets very, 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 very expensive. The shareholder agreements, this is what I've really talked about before, but the really important considerations are what the decisions the directors and shareholders can make, and also what they can't make. How often do directors and shareholders meet? How often do directors meet? How do you sell shares? Who can you sell shares to? What's the process of selling shares, right? So, for example, in some companies, they have some clauses in there that if somebody wants to sell their shares, an original shareholder wants to sell their shares, they first must offer all of their shares that they want to sell to all of the existing shareholders. And that's quite a common clause. But if it's not defined, that person who wants to sell their shares can go out and sell their shares to whoever, whenever, wherever. So all these sort of things about how you sell shares, how you acquire shares, share dealings, they have to be defined. If you're going to pay dividends, the company is profitable enough to actually generate excess amounts of money that can be repaid to shareholders in the form of dividends. Just how much of that extra profit gets paid as dividend, and what the tax position is on those dividend payments. Those sort of things have to be detailed in the shareholders' agreement. If the company gets sold, how does the company get sold? Do you need to have all shareholders, every shareholder agreeing? Or do you just have to have more than 51% of the shareholders agreeing? Or do you have to have more than 75% of the shareholders agreeing? Or just what is that situation? How does the company get sold? How do disputes, which there's always disputes within companies, how do these disputes get resolved? What is that process? And there'll be several different aspects to that process. And also things like deed of ascension, so that new shareholders might join in. You really just need to be aware of what state, national legal obligations you've got to operate under your business. And like I said, it's best really just by asking a commercial lawyer that straight question to refer you to reports or to legislation or to give you some written guidance. But like I was saying before, ignorance is not a defence. Again, business terms and conditions and legal contracts and things like this. Legal contracts are legal contracts which are best drawn up by lawyers, and I'll leave it to you to have a look at the wording there. You've got to have sales agreements, services agreements, all these sort of things. Again, you're dealing with lawyers. Memorandums of understanding are quite commonly used. They're not legally binding, but they are a very useful starting point to try to give some structure to a relationship between two parties. So it is a memorandum that reflects the understanding between the two parties in terms of a business venture, and it is reflection of that understanding in terms of what the obligations, responsibilities, payments, etc., for the two parties actually is. But it is not legally binding. So memorandums of understanding, which is not legally binding, quite often are precursors to joint venture agreements, which are legally binding. So sometimes joint venture agreements can take 2 or 3 years to actually finalise. Memorandums of understanding, because they're much briefer documents, they might be defined in 1 or 2 days. So quite often you have you operate under a memorandum of understanding, which gives those obligations, etc., and responsibilities to the different partners, defines those, and they are used as operational code until a joint venture agreement is actually drawn up, which is a legally binding document that describes the full relationship between the different partners within a project. There are, several different sorts of joint venture agreements. I won't try and go into those and break those down for you, because it just gets into quite a lot of detail. In terms of just running a business, there's quite a lot of legal documents you need to be able to have. And this, again, is where the lawyer comes in. Some of these documents you can actually pull off the internet right now, and you can use them at, as a proxy, when there's not a lot of money or reputation at risk. But as more money gets involved and becomes at risk, then you've really got to start using a lawyer to actually get these documents properly drafted. So there's further reading, which are really, I think, quite useful. They don't take a long time. You'd probably take about 30, 40 minutes to read all of these different documents, but they're well worth having a look at. So yeah, that's the first part of the legal considerations, as I call it. The next part is going to be about compliance and governance. So if there's any questions, please let me have those questions.
Hi, Peter. Just a question. When you are kind of starting and the business is taking up, would you need to set aside some funds for future legal problems? Like set aside proactively?
Yeah, look, certainly. Those documents. So if you're operating in Australia right now, you can get different documents like constitutions and shareholder agreements. You can get these copies of these for quite cheaply, really. But the devil is in the detail, and the shareholder agreement, it's a general shareholder agreement that's shared, in the internet, is really going to miss the detail of what is required in your business. So you do actually have to get some guidance from a lawyer in terms of what you tell the lawyer what your business is, to tell them how many people are going to be shareholders, at least initially, how the business is going to try and grow, and you actually have to. It's best just to ask them as to whether they can provide a document that covers the different aspects that you see as being important, and the lawyer knows as being important, right? So you will need legal advice. I know in Australia the legal advice comes at about something like $400 an hour. So when you're talking to lawyers, you need to be prepared to talk to lawyers and be very aware of the questions you should be asking them. You should not go into a lawyer and just ask them to provide something without giving them any guidance. Because they can simply charge you a terrific amount of money, do a hell of a good job, but not a job that's actually required for the company. So you just need to be very careful. You need to be involved with a lawyer. You need to be prepared to be involved. You need to be aware of some of this information that's in the presentation. Read through it. If you don't understand it, you can certainly come back to me. But there's also other levels of information that's on the internet, and it's quite reasonable that you can get into the right ballpark to be able to have a sensible, directed discussion with a lawyer for not a lot of money.
Peter, just as follow-up, I think, is there something like legal insurance at all? Or risk insurance that you can take to be able to help you with, let's say you're being sued for intellectual property or something like that?
I'm sure. I would guess that there is some sort of insurance, but how well it would cover you, I wouldn't be sure. I think, just my view of the law is you just got to, you really got to do your homework on it, because it can really backfire if you don't do. It's like anything. If you're really well prepared, that's probably the best way of managing the situation. So to give you a quick example, I mean, we have had and do have threats made on some of our businesses by lawyers. We had one, the one that challenged us on our logo really surprised us. It seems that there was a lawyer that was just sitting down, and maybe it wasn't even a lawyer, it was a legal clerk, who was just looking at logos and trying to work out whether, which logos, because logos are always appearing every day, there's new logos, which logo was close to a logo of the company's, and they found that our logo had several similarities, and they challenged us, and we took the view that yes, we could actually challenge them. There was enough differences that we could possibly even win it in the court, but it would actually take us thousands and thousands of dollars. It would distract us by months in actually trying to go and do the challenge in court. So we just basically redesigned our logo and went our own way. But in redesigning our logo, we took a lot of care and consideration as to whether our new logo was anything close to anyone else's. So we did a lot more homework. But legal insurance, I would imagine there is some, but I don't know. I'm certainly not an expert in it.
Maybe that's a business, Peter.
Yeah.
There's another question from Jay Bautule. So just let them speak.
Okay.
All right, thank you. No, I needed clarity between the MOU and the service agreement, and why you say MOU is not binding, it's not legally binding. So is it still relevant? Thank you.
Yeah. So look, the MOU is a memorandum of understanding where both parties say that they're going to work together. So their intention is to work together. Their intention is to work together in this sort of way, and that it describes the way that they're going to work together. It describes the roles, the responsibilities as best they know it at the time. But it is it's legally recognised as being something that is not it's not suitably defined. It's not that well defined. So the level of definition of the memorandum of understanding is not suitable for being tested in a court of law. I think that's the way to describe it. So therefore, they say it's not a legally binding document, and it's almost like by intent. The intent of it is to define in a very fast, a very convenient way of what the relationship between two companies is. The intent is not to define every aspect of that relationship. That's really something that you need a contract, and the contract you'll find will be, like I was saying, I think before, it could be 30 pages, it could be 60 pages. These things, these joint venture contracts, commercial contracts, they can take a long, long time, years to actually finalise, because you are really working across a tremendous amount of detail there, legal detail. And so they allow people to almost do something quick just so that they can start their relationship up. And it's more than a handshake. Obviously, it's something written down, but it's not a legally binding, definitive, well-defined, detailed contract. Is that okay? You
Yes,
understand?
thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much for the clarity. Yes.
No problem. Any other questions? I'll just go on to the next section then, because it's another legal section. So just stand by while I change a few things. Okay, can people see the next presentation, legal compliance and governance?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so the reason that I'm talking about legal compliance and governance is that it's one of the areas that comes under a lot of scrutiny. In Australia, it's under scrutiny almost 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And having said that, you would think that people would behave themselves and work in legal compliance and under strict governance, but no, that's not the case, not in Australia. So given that we're not in Australia, and Australia's got a problem with this area, you can imagine that Africa has got a big problem. And I say that because I've operated in Africa for 25 years and I know about legal compliance and governance standards, and they're quite low. And they're recognised as being low. So the problem in this is that it's really in the area of financing companies. So you will find that there will not be any professional investors that will invest in companies that do not have and do not operate under strict compliance and governance. So what happens is that the companies that you really want to be dealing with in terms of accessing money, the angel investors, the high net worth people, those smaller institutions, even the venture capitalists, the ones that you do want to be getting money from because it's the right sort of money, it comes from a good home, it comes with time and experience of the person investing, so they're investing time and experience, etc., with you, that won't come to you. So what you do get is you get the second, third, fourth, fifth tier of investors that are very marginal. They're not very high quality investors. Now, I might be a little bit controversial in saying this, but it's my experience. So for me, what I'm particularly interested in is actually starting companies that actually have the right degree, the right procedures, the right governance and compliance standards from the start. Because then once you've got that and you can demonstrate that and you can put your hand on your heart and say, yes, we do have proper governance, we do have proper compliance, and here it is, you can see it, and you can see us, we walk the talk and all that kind of thing, then raising money, and in particular raising money for ventures in Africa, but not only Africa, Australia's the same, becomes a lot easier. So that's why I'm talking about legal compliance and governance. That's why any companies that VACA would be involved in will have to have proper legal compliance or governance, and otherwise it's just too difficult. Okay, so just very quickly, what a company looks like. Nice little diagram here. You have shareholders that purchase shares in your company. You have a board of directors, and they interface with the shareholders. They're responsible to the shareholders. The shareholders, the other word you can use for shareholders, they're the owners. They are the owners, they own shares, and they own a percentage of the company. The board of directors, the person who looks after the board of directors is a chairperson, and the chairperson is generally either a lawyer or a very experienced company director. The board of directors are generally people that can be co-founders, or they can be representative co-founders, but also they have the right experience and network of contacts that can bring a lot of value to the company here. So the company actually is run by a chief executive officer or a managing director. If it's a managing director, the difference in Australia is that the managing director is actually a member of the board. If it's a chief executive officer, they're not on the board. So a chief executive officer would not necessarily go to the entire board meeting and would not be voting on any matters. Okay, then you have a chief operating officer and you have a chief financial officer. The operating officer operates the business, and the financial officer operates the finance and makes sure the money's coming in and money's going out, etc. So this is just really kind of a very, very high level of what a company actually looks like. You've got owners, you've got a board of directors who really communicate to the shareholders, the owners. The board of directors is run by a chairperson. You can have a chief executive officer who manages the day-to-day running of the company. The board of directors might only meet once every 3 months. They tend to focus mostly on the strategic sorts of matters for the company. That is the longer term aspects of the company. The chief executive officer has really got to be looking at the day-to-day, minute-to-minute sort of operations of the company. And they've generally got people like a chief operating officer and a chief financial officer to assist them, and even more. Okay, so that's what a company really looks like in a very high level sense. So when people talk about corporate governance, it's the structure of rules, the practices and the processes that are used to direct and manage a company. If you don't have proper corporate governance, it can cast doubt on any aspect of the company's operations and, in fact, its ultimate profitability. And if this doubt actually becomes substantive in any way, then the company may well become uninvestable, and a lot of legal issues can result from this. So this is why I'm particularly interested in setting up proper corporate governance. That is the structure of the rules, the practices, the processes that is going to manage the company, and you do it right at the start. Because any of the professional investors, they'll go straight after the governance practices. They'll want to have a look and see, well, what do you do? What do you think you do? What's written down? And if nothing written down, then they're gone. Professional ones are, and they should be. But if something's written down, then the next question is, what actually happens? Okay, so you've got you've got everything written down and lovely reports and so forth, but actually what happens? And so they go after that. So this is under much more and more scrutiny, and it should do. And you can see that when things go wrong, and they have gone wrong in Australia, like I was referring to, that if we just have a look at the anti-money laundering governance that was absent in one of the largest banks in Australia, they had 23 million breaches of the anti-money laundering, and they got a total fine of $1.3 billion. It's largely viewed as not being big enough. And what that would mean, I think, is obviously wasn't big enough. But anyone who's found, breaching any anti-money laundering governance is going to really be under very, very significant financial stress very quickly. We also found that there's one of the casinos actually didn't have anything close to proper corporate governance, and they've been fined billions of dollars, and I'm not quite sure how it's going to all finish up, but there was even found that they couldn't even run properly a business according to Australian community expectations. That was one of 3 casinos in Australia. So this corporate governance is really it can be very expensive. It can be very dangerous. If you're not on top of it, you might as well get on top of it right at the start. And it doesn't take that much to get on top of it at the start and just maintain it. You can see here types of non-compliance that comes up. Failure to report properly on time. Failure to meet a deadline. You can get $60,000 fine. False and misleading reports. You can get $600,000 fine. So this is real money. And in Australia, it's very, very it's under the spotlight, and we will become under the spotlight in Africa. And like I'm saying, it's not that hard to actually set up the systems to manage this properly, and you should do it and do it quickly. So in Australia, we actually have the Australian Institute of Company Directors, because corporate governance and compliance is actually a board responsibility. So the Australian Institute of Company directors are on a board. They actually put out a set of principles that provide guidance to directors. And so they have, so I was talking about the board being responsible for longer term thinking in the company. That's called strategy. So there's got to be an alignment of strategy to the purpose of the business. So there's some detail on that, and certainly you can, I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can read through that the organisation's purpose must be clear. It's got to be written down, and it's in the governing documents and understood by the board. Again, you know, if you're a board member, you actually have to go after the governing documents and make yourself aware of what those governing documents are. And you must see the purpose of that organisation written down very, very clearly, and you must understand that. The board approves strategy to carry out the organisation's purpose. Decisions by the board further the organisation's purpose, and the board regularly devotes time to consider the strategy and make sure that the strategy is aligned to the purpose. So there's any number of, and you've got questions to consider as a director, and there's any number of these principles. There's actually 10 principles. And rather than me just read them out, because you can read them yourself, I would just say it's actually quite a serious matter. And I'm quite happy to discuss anything with you. I'm actually a member of the Australian Institute of Company Directors and have been for probably about 10 or 15 years. And I'm also a director of 4 public companies and probably about 6 private companies. And so corporate governance, compliance is really incredibly important in those companies, and it's a very strong focus for the board on all those companies. Okay, so I'll just get you to understand that this is actually something important. There's a whole set of documents that I can provide to you to give you, and some reports, and I will provide these probably tomorrow, so you get a better idea of what these documents are, what they actually look like, what they do. But just having a look, when you get the time to look at these principles, they're actually really very good set of principles that do provide guidance to directors and shareholders and stakeholders as to what corporate governance and compliance actually is. So look, I'll just leave that with you to have a look at it when you have time, but I won't go into that right now. Are there any questions?
Yes, Nelly, go ahead.
My question is on the board membership, especially around the chairperson. Is there any guiding criteria when considering selection of a chairperson of the board?
Yeah. Yeah, good. Yeah, no, good question. Well, you know, the criteria that I would use is that the chairperson must be very familiar with how a company operates and how a board operates, and what the responsibilities of the board are, how the boards work, how they don't work. And the chairperson is, in fact, he runs the board, he or she runs the board. So you've got to call the meetings, make sure there's a proper agenda, make sure that all the different directors, they attend, that they are they are responsive to material that's being presented to them, that they are aware of what's being presented to them, and that they're all given proper information from the management, that all the directors also are given the chance to not only question management, but also to question any sort of documentation that comes through to them. And the chairperson's got to also understand the legal responsibilities of the board, and they are certainly in Australia. The legal responsibilities and accountabilities are growing almost by the week. So the chairperson has got to be experienced. They've got to be so in Australia, I would suspect you would, certainly if I was looking for a chairperson, I'd want someone to have been through an Australian Institute of Company Directors course. I would be looking for someone who's had experience with running boards before, particularly boards of successful companies. I would, the chairperson has to be quite a good communicator, has to be very articulate, has to be a very good listener. It's not necessarily important that the chairperson of the board dominates the board meetings. They don't. It's in fact quite the reverse. It's the directors who should be directing. They should be the ones who are presenting their views and asking their questions, etc. So the chairperson is trying to facilitate proper discussion, measured discussion, balanced discussion, etc. Is that answering your question, Nelly?
Yes, very well explained and easy to follow through. My next question. You just talked about what we're supposed to read further on around the purpose and strategy. At the onset of a startup, when is the best time to actually start drafting and drawing these requirements? Would it be best fitted at idea stage or wait into the startup phase?
Oh, look, I'd be drawing it up somewhere in the idea stage. Like I was saying, I mean, there's so if we look at the idea stage and just have a snapshot of one part of that idea stage. So let's say you've got 2 or 3 co-founders there, and they're exchanging ideas, or they've got an idea and they're trying to develop that idea. I mean, it's really a case that I would have that shareholders agreement drawn up right there. These documents get harder and harder to draw up as time goes by. Their non-existence can cause a lot of concern. That concern can either be very obvious concern, or it can be a concern that just sits within someone and they're just not talking about it, but they're worried about it. I think you just try to get that structure as defined as early as possible. Once you've gone through, you've got the idea, you've mapped that into, say, something like a business canvas model and a lean business plan. You've tested the market. Maybe you've spent $10,000 or something like this, $10,000 or $15,000. That's when I'd be drawing up that shareholders agreement. The constitution you actually have to have in Australia at the start when you register the company. If you don't have a constitution, there are constitutions that require only a small amount of input from you that are available. So you might want to try and do one of those to get you up and going, for the first 6 months or 9 months, and then replace that constitution with a new constitution that's much more detailed.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, the companies that we've Yeah, go on, sorry.
No, I just wanted to say that it looks like there's quite a lot of writing and drafting that needs to go on before you actually get started as a business.
Yeah, Nellie, you might just, I'll give you a list of the documents, and it's sort of implied in the presentations there that that you really require. I mean, the shareholders agreement, you really require that. We just went through registering a business in Rwanda, and you do have to have an Articles of Association, which is the equivalent of our constitution, and the lawyers can provide you with a working constitution on registration of the business. So it's like I say, it can actually get you going. It can be fine for the 6 to 12 months, but eventually, instead of not having anything, you have got something. You have got something that's drawn up by a lawyer, but it is a very general sort of document that governs things. You know, the matters that I described just a while ago, and you just need to think about them yourself. You know, what actually works for you? What do you feel comfortable with? And then when there's doubt, just get a lawyer to come in. But it shouldn't be a very big expense to actually use one of those sort of almost template constitutions. Put in what you think are the changes that you need to make it the company that you want it to become. You know, it should be fairly.
Okay, thanks. So as a startup, it's normal for the co-founders. So I'm referring to the organizational structure. It's normal for the co-founders to assume all those duties. The CEO, the director, the COO, the finance person. So as the company grows, what are the dangers of having the co-founders and or the shareholders assuming these positions? Are there any dangers of having them assuming these positions on a permanent basis?
Yeah. Oh, look, I think there'd be, you know, governance issues there. And they would express themselves fairly rapidly as the company starts to grow. So to give you an example of that, I'm involved with a company that actually has 3 of the co-founders on the board of directors. The 3 co-founders, and I'm one of those, they dominate that board. So there's another 2 directors that are meant to be independent. In fact, one of the directors is not independent because he's actually a shareholder. So if you're a shareholder, you're not a independent director. So in fact, in that company, we have 4 directors that are deemed as being not independent. And as a consequence of that, there are real questions from professional investors because there's a potential for conflict of interest there. The co-founders can, in other words, dominate the company to operate in a way that best benefits them, and they don't have to care about any other shareholder, right? So professional investors just say, no, sorry, we're not going to put any money in that because we're not saying that you're bad people, but we're saying that there must be a more independent directors than dependent directors.
Wow.
Right? So you just don't get the money. right? So there's the big problem. You might say, well, here we are, ready to go, and they just say, oh, wait a minute, have a look at this. These people can be running this company for their own purpose and not, nothing to do with it, with the other shareholders, and they can really run the company into the ground, which has been done before.
No.
Yeah. So when you start off, that's probably what you do. But you as the company grows, you're going to have management. It's not some management that's independent of the co-founders, and very particularly on the board, you're going to actually have to have predominantly independent directors.
Oh.
And I think you can understand why you have predominantly independent directors, because they're not looking after themselves, they're looking after the board. That's what they're legally responsible to do. Yeah. They don't have shares.
Also, Peter, kind of noticed in some of the companies that come out of America that when they appoint board members, they try and bring people who bring skill sets or access to markets or influence, or so, which might not necessarily be skill sets that are found on the co-founders or any other members within the team.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I also wanted to add, Peter, that no, this is a question really. We see many of the big companies, just giving an example of the Murdoch family with their big media companies, including Fox. We see the Bob Chain, tire services, big companies that have lots of relatives operating in the company. What are your thoughts?
I mean, if you're running a private company, you can basically run it. It's really up to you how you run it. There are certainly governance and compliance laws, and there's guidelines and everything like this, but you can actually have dominant. The company can be dominated by a single family, and you see this quite often. But it tends to be more in private companies and public companies. You touched on Foxtel. Well, that's an exception rather than the rule, and that's dominated by the Murdoch family, and it really goes back decades as to how they can actually get away with that sort of structure. But I really think that there wouldn't be that many people who'd be able to do that again. I think that's more a relic of the past than the future.
So what's your general advice in terms of having relatives in the company, wife, friends?
Oh, look, if I was in a private company, I'd just be saying, well, look, it was like, it's like you were saying before. I mean, basically, if I'm starting a company, I want directors there. I want really, really good directors. I want people who can open up networks, whether they be technical networks or financial networks. That's what I'd want. I'd want people who were experienced in actually growing businesses, global businesses, or businesses in a certain technology. I want people who've got a certain sort of knowledge, if you like, technical knowledge, or these would be the things that I'd be thinking about in terms of who would be on the board and who wouldn't be on the board. So, if you look at just very generically sort of on a board, you might find that there's quite a few older people who've got just more experience, a greater sort of network of people and so forth. And I think that's why the older people get on the board. but you shouldn't have a board just full of old people. You should have young people, because young people are, they've got new ideas, they've got new approaches, they've got a different set of networks, etc. You've got to look at also the gender balance is another thing that crops up in Australia in particular. And you might find that in the health sector, there might be more women than men, reflecting just who's working in that sector. But would I have my uncle on there who didn't have a great network and wasn't that experienced? No. So to me, and I might be the odd person out here, I wouldn't be a criteria for being a director on a company that I was associated with. Wouldn't be that the person was necessarily a family member. I mean, the thing going for a family member is obviously that you know who they are, you know them very well. You've grown up with them all your life. You know how they behave, you know the values they've got, etc. Sometimes that's not exactly that obvious in some people. It takes years and years before you really understand what makes what values people have got. Is that answering the question there?
Yes, thank you. I think Nelly has another question.
Thank you.
Okay.
I just wanted to find out from Peter around remuneration of the board members. Are you going to cover this at a later stage?
Say again, Nelly, did you say remuneration?
Yes, of board members, those that have been nominated to serve on the board.
Yeah.
I know that there is a practice that there is expectation of some allowance of some sort, a sitting allowance or whatever. I just wanted to know whether we're going to have a further discussion around that, because I know that it will have some implications when it comes down to our putting together our budgets for funding requests and so on.
Sure, yeah. In commercial companies, there's certainly a expectation that you'll get remunerated. The remuneration being a certain amount of money, which is like a salary, if you like. And that in a public company in Australia versus a private company. Public company in Australia, the amount of sort of salary, I'll just give you a quick idea, would be between 35 to probably $50,000 for a non-executive director. Right, that's a public company, and that's really a small company. If you're in a non-executive director for a large company, which might be, say, $1 billion company plus, you might be looking at directors' fees of, say, $150,000 to $250,000, I would guess, for a non-executive director. If the company's a startup and it's got no revenue, then I think the way that the non-executive directors are actually remunerated is by certainly not by getting paid cash, but by getting a certain amount of shares, which is a good thing, because it, if the non-executive director gets 1 million shares, then he or she would want to get that price of the shares going up as much as possible, as quickly as possible, within reason. So that's good for the company. So to actually pay a non-executive director in a startup in shares is actually quite a good thing. So then you might say, well, okay, well, what's the dollar value of the shares? So I think the way that I would answer that is I'd actually have a look at some of the small companies in the country and make the inquiry as to what the remuneration was, the cash remuneration was for the directors in those small companies. So if it's, for example, it turns out that on average it might be $10,000 a year for a small company, then you might look at providing shares to the value of $10,000 as being remuneration for a non-executive director. Do you follow that? And is that answering the question?
Yes, you are answering the question.
Okay. So that's what I do. And so to find out, you could ring up directors. There might be in Australia, there's reports that come out every now and again by the government that does dictate, pay ranges for non-executive directors of different size companies. So you can actually find that sort of information out. You can also find that information out in annual reports of public companies. So if you look at an annual report of a small public company, there is generally at least there is an Australia requirement that the directors' fees are actually mentioned, so you can actually see what they are.
Noted.
Okay, no problem. Any other questions?
Not from me, thank you.
Okay. Okay, so do you want to have a break for 5 or 10 minutes? How are we going? Hope everyone hasn't gone to sleep.
We're here.
Okay.
The next section I was going to talk about was really optionality mapping, which I won't go into any great detail about that. It's just I'll just go through some very basic sorts of concepts there, and it's a matter of being able to understand what the what the process is, and to sit down and apply it. It's not a complicated thing at all, and I reckon I might be able to get through that in about 30 minutes, I hope. And then I would just wrap up after that and just talk about, kind of just give a bit of an overview and answer any final questions. So we could be all done in, say, another 45 minutes. Who wants to give an opinion?
Yeah, that's all right, Peter. Thank you. I think because we're nearing lunchtime, it may be best to just continue and wrap things up.
Okay, no worries. All right. Okay, we'll do it like that. Okay, sorry, I'll just talk a little bit about marketing and advertising. I'm not, I wouldn't say I'm an expert in this, but I've certainly been involved in marketing and advertising and been deemed as being quite successful in doing that. So I will talk a little bit about it. There's a lot to read about it. And like I was saying before, Bernadette will go through marketing and advertising, and that's part of really running an online business course these days, because so much is actually done through online various online sort of ventures, if you like. So I'll just go through a very sort of high-level marketing and advertising presentation. So marketing, the difference between marketing and advertising. Marketing is the process of identifying customer needs and determining how best to meet those needs. So that's really what marketing is about. It's like who's in the marketplace, what does the marketplace actually look like, who are the players in the marketplace, how do they behave, all that kind of thing. Advertising is the exercise of promoting a company and its products or services. And advertising is like quite simply putting out advertisements. It's a matter of just whereabouts you're putting the advertisements out, what do they look like, what's the construct of those advertisements, etc. Okay. Yangama, you still there? Can you do the mute? Thanks.
Yes, I've done so.
Okay, no worries. Okay, so there's differences that I've mentioned between marketing and advertising. You can read through that. The advantage, of course, in going into marketing on the internet in particular is just the size of the internet. There's reportedly more than 5 million people around the world that now use the internet, which is a 400 million jump from 2020. So this is where the scaling comes in, and it's why the internet is really gets such attention from marketing and advertising people. And so it really is dominating the marketing and advertising sort of world. There's still obviously advertising going on with for TV and radio and so forth, but really it's not of the same caliber and not of the same reach as what is on the internet. So there's also quite a lot of there's a lot of interesting debate just to, how successful some of the online advertising is, and how do you measure that success and so forth. And I certainly won't go through and talk about all that. I just refer you to a couple of the YouTube presentations there that are quite interesting, and they don't take that long. It's probably about an hour to go through those three different YouTube videos that will give you the internet trends and give you a 10-year look at what's going on in terms of digital information, advertising, etc. So when you're running a business, obviously the understanding of the market segments, who the market players are, how that market operates, and everything like that is absolutely fundamental. So that's the key thing in marketing, is really that's what you've got to focus on. You've got to try and understand that. And you can do that to a certain degree on the internet, and there's various strategies you can employ to get an understanding of the markets, the market segments. Other things that are really important is just the market, if you like, is kind of like a very general concept, but it's really, really helpful to understand customers that are in and representative of the different market segments and have good relationships with those different customers, so you can understand firsthand what their needs are, where they're going, what they're thinking about, what they want, etc. Packaging of the product that you're putting out is absolutely critical. And even getting the price right is really incredibly important. I had a friend who put out a software product, and it was, in my opinion, really a tremendous product. And to him, pricing wasn't that important because he actually had a full-time job. So he said, "Oh yeah, I just want to do this," and and he wanted to sell to people like myself, and so he was selling his software product for $200, and he actually couldn't sell it, which is really amazing. I thought, well, what do you actually have to do? The product was first class, as I said, simple to use, simple to learn, etc. And he could not sell it at $200. So the joke was, oh, well, why don't you put it out for $2,000? And because people might think, oh, $200 is just a throwaway product that's not very good and they don't invest in it. And so he actually put it out at $2,000 and he actually sold hundreds of copies of his software. So, yeah, look, packaging is important, pricing is important. It's all to do with understanding, what the market is, what the market segments are, who the players are in the market, etc. Distribution efficiencies there, how you get your products or services out around, the country, the community, the world is really absolutely important, as is advertising. So advertising is a conversion of customer interest into customer conviction, into sales, into cash in the bank. So advertising, absolutely critical, and that's where the social media really comes in. And it's been really quite an interesting evolution of how they do advertising on social media. So the many facets of marketing, there's lots of little diagrams around, but it all starts with customer and competitive research. Who's who in the zoo, who's in the marketplace, what are they prepared to pay, what are they paying now, etc. From there, you get ideas about what products to develop. You get ideas about pricing. You get ideas about how to package to appeal to the customers back here. You've got to get your distribution right. You've got to get advertising right so that the product can get out back into the customers. You've got to get sales. It's not enough just to get likes and people saying fantastic words and stuff like that. You really got to get cash changing hands, and you've got to look after your customers. And this is all part of the marketing of today. They talk about 7 Ps of services marketing, and you can read about this. There's a lot of different publications on it, but the 7 Ps are quite simple. You've got you're dealing with people, customers, employees. There's social interactions, roles and scripts and relationships between all these people. Physical evidence, uniforms, signage, symbols, facilities, equipment, all this kind of thing. Process, service design, standardization, customization, operational efficiency. We're going through in one company, we're really heavily into this at the moment because all of the standardization, operational efficiency, that's controlling our costs, and we have to get our costs right down. So, but you also have to get your products out, and you have to get the product out on time, and you actually have to make sure that the product gets to where you want it to go. So there's all these different processes that you've got to get in place so that your customers keep happy. There's the promotional aspect, the product. What is the product? There's the definition of price and how you actually price your product or your service. There's so many different ways that you can actually price products. You kind of think, well, maybe there's just one way. I'm selling a tea bag, and a tea bag costs 40 cents or $1, whatever it is, and that's the only way that you actually sell it. Well, no, it's not. You can sell packages of 100 tea bags. You can sell packages of 1,000 tea bags, and then when you do that, what is the price and why, etc. Your location, always, really, really important in terms of marketing. Do you actually have, for instance, offices in the key market locations? Do you actually have a physical presence yourself, or is it just enough to be virtually there? What's the trade-offs, etc. like this? So these are all the considerations that go into marketing. I call it the 7 Ps because it is 7 Ps. The words all start with P. And like I say, I'm not really an expert in this, so someone like Bernadette will actually have more of an opinion about this. And I'd leave it to her to actually speak a little bit more about this. But in terms of advertising, it's actually really very, very interesting how advertising has evolved and how it is evolving. And they talk about 9 basic building blocks. You might see 8, or you might see 7, or you might see 10, but I just picked on these 9 basic building blocks of trying to get that advertisement out. So you've got to have an attention-grabbing headline, a visually arresting image, a sub-headline that expands on the headline. So basically more information, then you go to more information again. You do not want to have too many words because people don't read a lot of words these days. Then you've got to have a relevant and targeted offer. What is it that you're actually offering? What is the product or service that you're selling? A clear call to action, for whatever reason, do it now, sale, whatever it is. There's got to be some actioning description, evidence and proof of the claim of what you're making. I've got the best. Well, what's the evidence that you've got the best? Easy identification of the product and client name so that it actually becomes a household word, name, and a memorable tagline. Very interesting to look at the attention-grabbing headline. Again, Bernadette will probably go into this. She's certainly some of her work, actually. And here's the theory behind the power of the headline. If the headline is strong, it'll buy you 3 seconds of a reader's time. If the subheading is strong, it will buy you 30 seconds of the reader's time. If the body copy is strong, it will buy you maybe 3 minutes of the reader's time. This is actually a cascading, set of events, really. So the headline has got to stop you. It's got to stop you. You've got to say, "Well, that's got me in. I wonder what this is about," right? And it takes about 3 seconds. Then so you look to the next line underneath that, and it's got to maintain your interest, and it's got to actually push your interest up. It's got to elevate your interest. And again, that reading that headline and the thought is possibly only 30 seconds of the reader's time. But this is where the transaction really happens. This is where you got 3 minutes of the reader's time. So the reader's got to not only read it, he or she's got to identify with it and be prepared to pay for it. Now, this is kind of something I came across about a year ago, and I had to laugh about it because when someone told me about the business, I thought, oh no, it cannot. It can't be true. But anyhow, it is true. They do run a great business, and it's a business and a charity, which is kind of the thing I talked about a week ago. You can actually have these two intertwined, and it's called "Who Gives a Crap?" So that's the lead line. Who gives a crap? And you wonder, well, gee, I got 3 seconds there. I'm going to go and read who does give a crap and why? Well, they go on and they say our real love is toilet paper. Why, you might ask? So there's a bit more information there. We're now talking about toilet paper, but why are we talking about toilet paper and who does give that results in the transaction that they want, right? And they talk about, but really we love toilet paper because for us it's our way of making a difference. A very, very compelling business proposition. Right? You have to get in here and read this, but the headline and the subheadline, they actually get you in. They do exactly what they're designed to do, get you in to the true copy. And when you read the true copy, you come out and realize that when you're buying their toilet paper, there is actually more than a benefit just to them. There is actually a broader benefit, and you understand what that broader benefit is and how they're measuring that and delivering on that day after day. So that's it's an example of advertising that is, I think, really very, very interesting. If I just look at the social media and sort of just how people are spending their time, especially American people who are far more obsessed than, say, someone like myself with social media. But in recent studies, they say that the average American spends 3 hours on their phone, 5 hours looking at TV, spending X hours on the computer, where X might be 2 or 1 to 3 hours, and then Y hours trying to sleep. But it's a tremendous amount of exposure to social media here. Every day, one might guess that they might be getting exposed to social media of the order of 9 to 10 hours. And it's pretty close to like 70% of their waking time is actually, they're getting bombarded with social media content, telling them what to buy, why to buy it, etc. And that's quite amazing. It's not the same in Africa, I'm sure, but I don't know what it is in Africa, so I can't be too sure. There's another little video here that's well worth having a look at. It's I think it goes for about 2 minutes, and it gives you a completely different view on this this kind of caper here. The guy's called Tim Wu, and he's commenting as to why and how this phenomena has grown such that the social media now is actually dominating people's lives. They're stealing people's lives. So if you want to read about some very interesting viewpoints from Tim Wu, I'd thoroughly recommend that. The various ways that you can put together marketing plans. I've got one there that's a summary. I just rather than talk to it, say that, have a look through it. There's nothing very difficult in there at all to understand. It's just a matter of what the right sequence is and just executing and thinking about it. I don't think there's a lot to it. 3 basic features of effective advertising: grabbing your attention, doing so in a memorable way. They talk about locking power. Here they talk about stopping power and pulling power. So you've got to stop people, pull your attention over to what you want them to see. And then once they've seen it, you've got to get them to remember it. Not just remember it, but recognize it in the future, be able to recall it instantly. They talk about techniques for improving memorability. And then they talk about persuasion and controversial puffery, which has been raised to a new level by people like Donald Trump with his puffery. So that's the basic features of effective advertising. There's a very interesting video that's put out by Warren Buffett, who's one of the most successful investors ever in the world. He's actually talking about 2 women who started their business, advertising, marketing, and they actually became extremely successful. I think it runs for about 12 minutes, but it's well worth having a look at. It's very well done, and it really does give documentation as to how you can start a business from nothing. This is some of the work that Bernadette's done and some of the courses that she actually presents. So she does a different sort of mapping. She talks about mindset, how to develop an entrepreneurial mindset, how to develop a minimum viable product, momentum, how to keep that product going, how to develop that product, how to maintain customer interest and so forth. Talks about marketing and motivation. And the business the talk that she's interested in giving next Saturday is on how to build an online business. And a lot of this is really to do with digital marketing. So I'll leave a lot of this to her to talk about, but if you wanted to see some of the work that she's done and some of the courses, go to that website there. You can see how to build an online business here, and you can get some ideas about what's going to be in her course next week. But she'll be talking between 1 and 2 hours. So if you're interested in marketing, advertising, sales pitches, that sort of thing, that would be really good to listen to. There's a lot of actually free courses on digital marketing, free being in inverted commas as well. But there's a number there that you can actually have a look at and get a very good idea about digital marketing. So that's really all I've got to say about marketing. There's, like I say, there's videos there, reports to be read, and Bernadette will come through and be talking about online businesses, which is a lot to do with marketing and sales strategies and advertising. So, is there any questions about that? Anything there? Okay. Okay, so I'm talking here about oh, okay, wait a minute. It's not quite right. Okay, I'm going to talk about optionality mapping. So the interest for myself in actually being able to draw up these optionality maps or decision mapping is a way of actually me trying to map out what the different options are should something either go very wrong or very right. I'm one of these sort of people who do like to try to map out what the different options are for various reasons. One of them is that invariably things never go quite as you plan. So it always has helped me to have an idea or several ideas as to what I do or what my options are should something not work out or should something become very, very, very successful. So this is kind of what this optionality mapping really looks like. There's all sorts of different ways that you can try and build it and to try and use it. You can say, well, the question that I'm trying to look at is really how should I improve decision making? So there's a couple of different things that you can do. Option here, I could use decision mapping. Option over here, I could create a list of pros and cons. So if I actually then move down here to have a look and explore the pros and cons, etc., of this, then I see the pro is that it's simpler than a decision map because you just have to list all the pros. The con is it doesn't track reasons in favour of, against, or against the pros and cons. And con again is it lacks the visual clues of mapping. Right. So, and this is really the essence of why I get into decision mapping. I love these maps that I can create that are of quite complex things, but that can be displayed and distilled into visual elements that I can track very, very quickly, and I can change very quickly, and I can understand the relationships very, very quickly. So you had last week, I was talking about business canvas models and lean business plans. All of these are maps in essence that are on one page. And here we're talking about a decision map or decision mapping. That is actually all of the elements are shown, the relationships are shown, the outcomes are shown and mapped. And I like this kind of thing very, very much. So an option is to use decision mapping. The pros, it helps make decisions in accordance with psychological recommendations. And the reason, there's one of the key researchers here recommends tracking decisions, their pros and cons, and alternatives considered. And also the reason is that he says to eliminate what you see is all there is by identifying what you don't know. So you can not only see what you can see, but you can see what you don't know. And this can actually be quite revealing, and it can be quite very, very useful in a number of situations, so certainly the situations I've been into. The disadvantages is that it can slow down meetings. It can slow down processes because it's a little bit more involved, but it's a case of doing the preparation, and this is part of a preparation, and the better you are at doing preparation, the more likelihood you've got of being successful in whatever venture you're going down into. People say, well, okay, yeah, some of the reasoning, it slows down meetings. People get confused with the diagramming process. Well, if they do, well, I can't see how you can really get that confused with it. It's just that they may not know how to do it. They may not know how to use it. An objection might be time will be made up for with more focused discussions, which are certainly worthy of consideration. And also the objection is that it results in better decisions getting made. So my argument would be that, yeah, you are making better decisions. You are actually being able to focus on parts of the decision-making process that need to be focused on, and that the time and effort in actually constructing these decision-making or optionality maps is really something that's well worth doing. So the process uses lots of different icons. I don't know whether people have actually got any had any experience in doing and using icons in basically drawing up flow sheets. I used to use these many years ago in terms of drawing up computer programs, how the computer program would actually operate. So you have a start for and then you have things like a task activity, doing something, right? You can have an online activity, a virtual activity. You can have data going into a task. You can have sub-processes sitting underneath the task. You can have delays. You can be storing data, etc. So there's any number of these different mapping icons that are available to be used. They're quite simple to use them. There's the connectors. They can be bent. They can be linear. An example here is a hiring interview process. You start, you get the resumes, you sit down, the activity is that you review and you score all the different resumes. You want to make a decision whether to interview or not. If you don't, then you inform the applicants. It's over, there's no more. If you do, you schedule an interview. You go through with the interview and score. That's the task and activities. You then have to make a decision. Do you offer anyone a job? for one person? If the answer is no, inform the applicants and the applicants are rejected. If yes, you negotiate and you put out an offer letter, which is the finish. So that's just kind of like how you map out different processes. And it's a matter of mapping out different processes, sub-processes, if you like, so you understand what the different options are when some processes don't quite work out properly. It's like I say, I think it's actually very, very simple to use. It's a flow sheet. You've got symbols that are fairly easy to follow and easy to use, and it allows you to give insight into what your options are should things go wrong or right or not according to plan. I won't go through that one. So there's rational decision-making sort of worksheets. These are really interesting when you have decisions to get made. What is your decision? What's your options? So you might have the decision you have to make, and then you can opt. You have a number of options that you could follow. What are the criteria you're going to try to use to make that decision? What are the potential biases that you actually have? And it could be you personally, or it could be the company, or it could be the group of people who are going to be making that decision. And what's the timing for that decision to be made? So you actually, you can draw up this worksheet of all these different decisions that you actually have to make. And these decisions can actually be part of the mapping process here. So that's the decision. So to each of these decisions, you can actually attach a decision map making worksheet. Okay. So this is kind of like you're building up what your options are, what the decisions, where are the decisions, and what's the dimensions of these decisions that you've got to make. What are my options? What are my criteria that I'm going to use to actually make a decision about which option to go and to follow? What are our biases? And so many people just make decisions and don't even think about the biases they actually have that bring into the decision-making process. Whereas in this here, we're really trying to flush those biases out and put them down so that we can, reference them and be aware of them, because there are amazing just how many decisions are made with bias, but without really having conscious reference to those biases and understanding of those biases. So this just talks about the explicit, not implicit decisions. And one of the first things that you do in a lot of the businesses, which might sound completely and utterly ridiculous, is that first rule about decisions is to know when you are actually making a decision. Sometimes you can actually have decisions made without a conscious process going on that is actually what you're doing. You're actually making a decision. It might sound ridiculous, but in fact, it isn't ridiculous, and it does happen like that. You can have a meeting and you can have several decisions come out of the meeting without ever sitting down and saying, wait a minute, we're actually here to make a decision on this and this and this. And so there's no real conscious structure of decision making. It's just decisions get made on the fly. It's a terrible way to run a business, and typically, if you do run a business like that, your probability of failure is going to go up very, very high. There's a concept of sacrificing or satisficing, as it's called. And this is a term for simply deciding on an option that meets a minimum threshold. So you have this minimum threshold, and while satisfying works in some situations, like choosing what you're going to have for lunch or buying staples, when it comes to important decisions, tied to allocating resources, organising a company, etc. Satisficing is a chronic disease of underperforming organisations. The bigger the decision, the more important it is to spend the time and mental energy to expand the option set to include multiple good options, right? So you've just got to flush these options out. If you don't have a way of flushing options out, then the option that you may be following may, in fact, be the suboptimal or even the worst option, right? So this is a process of saying, I'm going to make a decision. To make a decision, I've got to understand my options. To understand my options, I've got to really put some effort into understanding each of the options. And I've got to be aware that there is a concept of satisficing, which will deliver very poor optionality into my decision-making and compromise the business. So that's kind of what this is about. You look at the criteria of making decisions. It's amazing that some people can make decisions without very much thought into why they're making decisions or how they're going to, in fact, make decisions. You wouldn't think that was possible, but in fact it is. So I'll just let you actually look at that, because I know it's getting pretty late and near lunchtime and so forth, but you can do all sorts of other things with optionality. This is an example of something that I used to use quite regularly. One of the reasons I could do this is that I could actually map out what they call an expected value. So the expected value is actually quite an interesting concept. So you actually have a lot of several options that you can actually follow through. Each of these options actually has a cost that you can determine. So now we're in the financial sort of world, and then you have an outcome from each of these different decisions, right? So I've got a decision here, build a new scheduling app. It's going to cost me $50,000. Now, as a consequence of that, I could have a large revenue or I could have a small revenue. I think the chances of me having that is 40% for large, 55% for small. And the monetary value of that small revenue is 150,000 and the large revenue is 200,000. So you can actually do just a series of multiplications. And you can see just how simple these multiplications are, but you say, well, okay, here's the revenue. I've got a possibility of earning $200,000. I reckon the possibility is 40%. So my expected value down here is 200 times 0.4, because 0.4 is 40%, plus I'll get 55% of 150,000, same logic, and I'll take off the amount that I had to spend to get the app. So I get an expected what they call an expected monetary value of $112,000. If I go through here, and you can have a look at this option and map it all out, same kind of logic, and you get an expected monetary value of 65,000. Over here, if you do it a slightly different way, different approach, expected monetary value is 152,000. So pretty clearly, this one being the option that would deliver you the highest expected monetary value. This is the option that you actually follow. Okay, so this is really called an expected monetary value analysis, and it's a way of trying to put dollars onto the options that you're considering, right? So, okay, that's all I really wanted to say about optionality. So is there any questions about that? No questions. Maybe everyone's gone to lunch.
Oh yeah, I think there aren't any questions.
I don't think there are questions. But
No questions, Peter.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right. No problem. Well, I'll just, this is just the review. It's very, very quick. So thanks for hanging in. So basically where I started with last week was talking about the importance of actually, as an entrepreneur, knowing yourself and knowing what you're passionate about. It's also extremely important to know the markets that you want to operate in, and understand who the customers are in those markets and how they behave, etc. And know the processes that actually operate in those markets, because if you do know that, then you can understand how value gets created or destroyed. You can understand how risk is maximized or minimized, or how you might be able to do that. You can understand the state of play of the markets, and you can understand what the opportunities are in those markets. So, and I'm assuming here that you're in the market, you have that knowledge of the market because you're actually quite passionate about the market and about really events that happen in that market, right? So you might not know the full market to start off with. You might not be passionate about the full market, but you might be passionate about processes that happen in that market. But to really try to get full value out of that knowledge and to drive that passion, will pay to actually understand all those processes that sit around your particular passion, so that you can work out where you can actually deliver value. So this comes on to just understanding from what I'm saying here, how value is created and how it is destroyed. This is really the essence of trying to build companies, sustainable companies, by creating value for your customers, or to stop them destroying value. I've talked really about high quality broadband networks, like-minded professionals. So these like-minded professionals are people that, it just takes time to really understand people, to be able to trust people, to understand their ethical positions, their principles, how they make decisions, etc. So the sooner that you start actually trying to build these high quality professional networks, I think the better you're going to be. And the emphasis here is on broadband networks. So just don't sit within your own small area of expertise. Try to get out, try to broaden your network as much as you can do, and to have people in that network who've got commercial skills and who've got legal skills. These are they're important to have. And I've been able to, I think, minimize the probability of failure by actually having people in my network with very significantly endowed with commercial skills and legal skills, like I was mentioning before. Certainly what has worked for me is maintaining broadband education all my life. I've wandered from physics to geology to chemistry to IT to finance, and now I'm sort of looking and learning a little bit about health. So I have a broadband sort of education. I pursue that education. I pursue that knowledge. I've done that all my life. I talked a lot about having the proper structure and governance in place early. I really believe that's absolutely fundamental. You've got to have a proper board of directors, the proper composition, etc. We talked about that. The constitution of the company, you've got to really have that down and well defined and feel very comfortable with that. Shareholders agreements, statements of social purpose if you're a social enterprise like we are. Strategy's got to be formulated and out and written down and reviewed every year. And you've got to build your own self-belief, and then you've got to build that self-belief of the team and the team's purpose, if you like. You've got to build your own resilience and cultivate your own mental health. You're pretty well responsible for that, because when you do become an entrepreneur, you are going to rely on that self-belief, and you're going to rely on your resilience and your own mental health to be able to come through, to see you through what can be very difficult stages when things go wrong, not according to plan, and etc. So this is actually really quite important. I put a fair bit of time into that, and I do that every day. Got to get and understand your own leadership style. There is a chance that if you're an older person, you probably won't be able to change very much. So you've got to understand what type of leader you are, what stage of the business is it best for your style of leadership, what stage of the business is the worst time for your style of leadership, and that's the time you should exit the business, in my view. A lot of businesses have been destroyed by leaders who stay around too long. You've got to cultivate investors and donors way before you need them and as early as possible. And I've talked about that, so no more about that. The construction of the team is really, really important, because they're a source of ideas, and the team gives the investors confidence that the company has got a higher chance of being successful than if it had a dysfunctional team, or a team where there were obvious weaknesses and so on. If there's failure lessons that I can tell you about, it's when I've tried to get too complicated too quick. So I try to keep it as simple as possible and no simpler for as long as possible. Not letting go. I've seen co-founders who simply cannot move away from the business when they should move away, and they get in there and they interfere with the business when their level of expertise is not appropriate. They're very good with small companies, but when a company gets to a certain size of largeness, they simply don't have the expertise to grow with the company, and they should be moving on. Lack of discipline on budget and cash flow. This is where people tend to make a lot of mistakes. You've got to have a budget. You've got to try and keep the budget up to date, and you've simply got to watch that cash flow. There can be no surprises in the cash flow. You've got to keep on top of it. Definitely don't surprise investors, because if you surprise investors, there's a fair chance that they'll surprise you and go somewhere else. So you've got to communicate. You've got to do it clearly, concisely, and constantly. If you have someone in the company, in the team that doesn't fit, get them out quick. You've got to get sales right, and you've got to get onboarding customers right. Onboarding means that the person becomes a customer, and what you really want to do is you want them to actually be a champion of your business, of your product, of your service. And so this is the ultimate end result of successful onboarding of customers, which is part of the sales process. Do not overpromise and underdeliver. I won't talk about budgeting much more because we'll be out of time. Some words just to end up with. Life shrinks or expands in proportion to one's courage. If you don't have much courage, you tend not to go too far. Being an entrepreneur is a matter of you really do need a lot of courage to get out there and actually run by the strength of your convictions and your passions. when in doubt, let kindness and compassion guide you. Be the best. It's the only way that the market, it's the only market that's not really crowded or overcrowded. Busy is a decision. I love that. And happiness is a choice you make and skill you develop. Lots of other ones there that you can read, but that's about it from me. So I'm quite happy to take any questions from anyone right now, or if people want to put the questions in later, they can just send in via WhatsApp and I can reply to that. But yeah, thanks very much for everything. If you've got questions, please let me know. Okay.
Thank you, Peter. I will just add that we are enrolling everyone on LMS so that they can get the certificates, but they can also post the questions on the forum. So we'll send the links for everyone to enroll, and then that option, then there can be continuity of discussion in the questions that are answered on the forum can be viewed by everybody, so which will be of benefit to the community. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Yangama. And okay, so there's a process to go through there. There's the opportunity to post our questions, and I would at this stage just leave it at that and say that next week is when Bernadette will be talking and presenting on how to run an online business. I will actually come back and talk after her about the business canvas model and the lean business model as well. So I'll talk about that next week because some people didn't get the message in time to attend last week. So look, that's about it from me. So thank you very much for your attention. I really appreciate your time. And yeah, over and out. Enjoy your lunch. Bon appetit.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for the session.
No problem. Pleasure.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. See you next week.
See ya.
Thank you. So many thank you messages for you, Peter, in the chats forum.
Ah, yeah, right. Okay. Okay. I'll leave now. So yeah, thanks very much.